well, there's the.
Got it. Yeah.
All right, there we go again. My name is Susan Bonley. I'm from the DACC library. Welcome. And tonight's presentation is on resisting censorship. And we are going to be talking with local librarians who will talk about how they are the front lines for protecting your freedom to read. This week is Banned Books Week. It is an annual celebration of the freedom to read, and each library approaches the celebration a little bit differently. DACC has partnered with NMSU, and we will be hosting 2 events. And at the end of the presentation, I'll ask Dylan, who represents Dylan McDonald, who is doing our sort of technical sort of background person. We'll talk about the second event, which will be over at NMSU library. We have a panel discussion of 3 local librarians. Terese DeSimio, who is the director of the Diana Community College Library. Dean Kevin Comerford, who is the dean of the NMSU libraries. And Stephen Haydu, who is the manager for technical services at the Thomas Branigan Memorial Public Library. I will have 2 questions for each of the panelists to ask. And then if you have any questions regarding censorship or how the libraries do various things regarding challenged books or challenged materials, please put them in the chat, and we will do a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. So let me get started with putting up the questions. The 2 questions we are asking are, what do you think is the role of your library in resisting censorship, centering equity, and fighting to protect the freedom to read? That's the first question. And the second question is, how is your library protecting your patrons' freedom to read, along with unrestricted access to information and ideas? So I will put down the slides, and we will start with Terese in answering the first question.
Okay. Well, we're lucky in that the ALA, the American Library Association, has extensive resources about censorship and a statement about it that encompasses all the library organizations that fall under it, including the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is what academic libraries, we're under ALA umbrella in ACRL. And ACRL has a very strong wording, you know, that they all signed on with the statement that ALA made. So that's a good thing that we can always refer back to. So that's pretty powerful. And then we have our own collection development policy, which specifically says, you know, there might be something that will offend somebody. And that I put up a link to a form to fill out. I know from public library experience that the filling out the form doesn't often happen, or at least it didn't at the one I worked at. People would take it into their own hands more subversively to get rid of the books they found objectionable in a variety of interesting ways. So the big things we do, I guess, and there's a fine line between censorship and selecting. DACC libraries, we focus our collection efforts on the programs we have here and things that are of academic interest to our professors. And so we don't have everything, but that's because we've had to make selections with our limited budget. So that's one thing we always have to think about, is trying to provide diversity in the things that we do provide. The other thing that's good is that both EBSCO and ProQuest, which are our two biggest vendors of databases, have DEI statements, diversity, equity, inclusion, that they do their best to not censure things and to make things accessible to different languages and different people. And they try to collect things that show all points of an idea. So that's a wonderful thing that we can rely on our database vendors to do that for us. The other thing that the DACC library does, because we're very small staff and we don't have a collection development librarian, we bought into the Bowker book analysis system for the past year. And what it is a system that will compare our holdings of ebooks and physical books to the resources for research libraries database, which is published by ACRL, the Academic Library Organization. So because of their strong statements and views on censorship and DEI, I felt confident that they're not going to be censoring out books, and that would save us having to try to hire a collection development librarian and let us do some pretty decent comparison with our collection. I think that's all I really wanted to say about that. We're lucky also in that academic libraries are very rarely targeted. ALA research says only 1% of challenges happen to academic libraries. And that's probably because of the intellectual and academic freedom sort of atmosphere we have at academic libraries. You expect to see things that aren't necessarily your points of view. That's our purpose, is to teach you things that you may not know. And I had one last thing. I had a director who I thought was awesome, and it's probably taken from somewhere else, but he used to say, if we don't have something in our library that would offend somebody in our community, then we're not doing our job right. I guess the other thing we did was purchase the ebook versions, because EBSCO had them available, the ebook versions of 8 out of the 10 top censored or challenged books last year, and made those available through our catalog and databases. So supporting the books that are getting challenged is another way we can do that, in my point of view.
Thank you very much. Kevin, could you address the same question, please?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely, Terese made a lot of great points, and I agree. I think, compared to school and public libraries, academic libraries have it comparatively easier in terms of being targeted for censorship, for book banning requests and removal requests and so forth. I've had 2 confrontations since I started as a librarian, both in academic libraries. The first was when I was a very green paraprofessional right out of college. And so I really went sort of over my head. And the person that, came in, I was a night circulation supervisor. And the person came in and was not very organized, and they sort of ranted and raved and so forth. And they really weren't part of a structured, political movement like so many of the removal, requests that we see nowadays. The second was in California at UC Riverside. It was right after a political rally was held on campus, and I think one of the after effects of the rally was some folks got stirred up and decided they would go try to assert their political will on the library, and they weren't students, but they had been on campus for the rally. So it does happen, and I think our role in academic libraries, we definitely our greatest weapon overall is to promote education, and more than just education about censorship and promoting information literacy, but I'd like to think of it, we need to promote more enlightenment these days. Sort of that spark beyond just education, where we understand have students that understand when they leave the importance of democratic principles and how a free society operates. We, just like events today, we also need to continue to support civil discourse on freedom of ideas, and then when these are the two little events that I related there. We know when we do get reactionary kinds of events that come to the libraries, we do need to be able to confront them, but with intelligence and calm, both. I think a lot of the rationale for book banning requests and collection removal requests has to do with actually folks that want to create incidents that become media attentive, and they seem to be these days more related to specific political agendas. I tend to think that I'd actually be relieved to talk to just a concerned parent about library, the contents of our library, whereas a lot of the folks that show up tend to be connected, whether they're parents or not. I mean, they seem to be connected to a larger political agenda. And then I think Terese mentioned this as well. We need to be vigilant for the different ways that the folks who are intent on removing books from our collections are going about it. I have had evidence that people have come in and shredded books that were particularly in the categories that a lot of the book banners take objection to, and throw them in the garbage, so they don't ever have to actually take them out of the library. They find an out of the way spot and destroy the content. But we need to be vigilant with our monitoring, and make sure that we're aware of what's going on in the library. I do think we have protections from a couple of important Supreme Court decisions. I think one was 1960s. What was it? It was Tinker versus Des Moines School District. Students do not shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate, stating that students do have right to access ideas and information. The second one is the Island Tree School District versus Pico. Supreme Court decision. Local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. I think we do have, a number of legal precedents that can help us, in addition to the organizations that Terese mentioned. And then, certainly, our founding fathers. I love Thomas Jefferson's quote, censorship is contrary to the values and functioning of a democratic society. It's definitely enshrined in the Constitution. And, when we get down to it at the end, the greatest quote of all that we always have to bring up in events like this is Heinrich Heine's quote, that where they have burned books, they will in the end burn human beings. And that's from his tragic play called Almansor. And it's interesting, the circumstance where this quote was written was actually in reference to in the 15th century, the Christians burning the Quran, and which was what the quote came about in the play there. So it's definitely a work worth reading to understand a little more on that. I've probably taken too much time, so let's move on.
Well, thank you very much, both of you. Now, Stephen, you bring a different perspective to this because you're not an academic library, you're a public library. And obviously the people that come to visit your library, it's the entire community, all age ranges, whereas, university and community college libraries are less likely to get some of the patrons that you do. So can you give us your viewpoint on the question, please?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And yeah, because we have, so our collection is significantly broader in some ways and less academic. And indeed we get a wide range of people coming to see us. Well, I would say our role is to ensure that we provide access to a broad array of information. I feel our knowledge, we need to have knowledge that spans of all kinds of subject matters, cultures, and geographies. I also feel that it's very important that libraries are a resource for, well, we house the varied stories of humankind, and it's not just a bunch of entertainment books. I mean, it is entertaining, fiction and nonfiction, but we're also encased in that collection of novels and stories are kind of mirrors of people's lives and emotions and experiences, and that I think the value of that can't really be underestimated. So the collection is a really important part of how we resist censorship, is just by having all these things there. And any blocking of that and limitations imposed to access to those things it stunts the growth of the society. The library should be unbiased and nonpartisan and encourage freedom of speech and freedom to read. We need to encourage that in every way. That means including material that covers all points of view, so experiences of the socially or politically marginalized and disenfranchised persons are represented equitably with the traditional majority-centered fare that libraries have always had. And we really need to speak out against censorship in all its forms. And our books and databases should reflect that view. Also, how we treat the people that come in and help them find what they need is essential. That we do that in a respectful, engaged manner and listen to their questions and concerns. I guess I have little 5 line or 6 lines here, you know, basically what our role is to speak out against censorship, to ensure patron privacy in their choice of reading and viewing, educating the community about the dangers of censorship, and then having equity in the collection, equity in customer service, and equity and accessibility to the collection. None of these are small things. I cannot say that the Thomas Branigan Memorial Library has perfected any of these, but we are working on them actively and try to continuously improve. Having self-checkout stations so people can get to what they need. Always working on the collection and when somebody has a concern, you know, we have a whole, you know, a policy, a procedure for when people raise objections, and as Terese said, it's infrequent that somebody will actually fill out the form and follow the process. We've had, I think, one at the Thomas Branigan Library in the 4 years that I've been there. And it went through.
That's where the value of surveillance cameras come into play.
Well, you know, and then there is that piece too. Kevin had made reference to alternative ways of removing items from the collection. And, you know, you find that things disappear, and it's not always because just somebody wants to steal a book. It's sometimes because they're trying to shape our collection a little bit and just not returning things. And we know that, and basically a public library knows that there is going to be some percentage of material that we have to replace because it disappears, you know, just like we have to replace some things because they get worn out. And so you just know what those things are and plan accordingly in your budget. And, you know, so we're just, you know, mindful. And I guess really, so I have been, you know, I was in Alamogordo in 2000 when we had our infamous book burning there. That were, you know, I think, yeah, anyway. So yeah, so we know these things happen, you know, the Alamogordo also had a pride display that caused quite a ruckus, you know. So the people that are censoring, and it's always been there, and sometimes it's more exciting than other times. Sometimes it's pretty dry. I guess what concerns me now is I was just like right before we started taking a glance at what was going on. There's, you know, people had referenced the Michigan situation, and I'm noticing that there's a lot more efforts at legislation, and that is a concern. I you know, so one of the big things we can do to help resist censorship is vote. So anyway, those are some of my thoughts on this.
It's it would be interesting to hear from a school media specialist, but I guess they're not in the schools in Las Cruces right now. They rarely have a librarian in the schools.
Well, I was 12 plus years as a public library, a school librarian.
Oh, okay. You've had experience.
Just like all three of you, we had a process, and a school situation is a little bit different. I have to admit that. And as a school librarian, I was elementary, and I've been also pre-K through 12th grade at one school. And I actually had separate areas at that school the high school kids had their section, and the preschool and the younger grades had their section, and then there was a section for the middle grades and things like that. And the choice is the parents, in my opinion. And as a librarian, especially as a school librarian, you have to be very aware of what's in your collection. And you have to be aware of what might be considered inappropriate by some to, and it has to do with not only reading level, because they're very smart students, but it has to be age appropriate too. And if anything came up, then it was a discussion between the parent and the librarian first, and then the parent and the student. And as a librarian, I always abided by what the parent asked. And then in the classrooms, I know if there was any question, the classrooms should be prepared to provide an alternative assignment or reading material if a parent says, I don't want my child reading that. I don't think it's appropriate for my child, and parents are the experts on their children. Yes. However, parents are not the experts on other people's children.
Right.
And
Exactly.
that was the area where we got into some issues, because if someone said, I don't believe that this book belongs in the library, meaning I don't want my child to read it, and I don't want anyone else's child to read it or have access to it, then that becomes a completely different, that goes into censorship. So the idea is that you, especially as a public school librarian, you have to be very aware of appropriateness for different age groups. And you have to have a policy in place, like Stephen and Terese, and I'm sure Kevin, I know you guys do too. And you have to follow the policy. You can't just willy-nilly decide no, yes type thing. And you have to be open to communicating, like Kevin said, in an intelligent and calm manner, regardless of how the people who are coming in to talk to you are reacting or acting. You have to be there, and it doesn't always have to be a confrontation. So yeah, there are definitely in schools, public schools, policies quite similar, a challenge policy and things like that. So
Well, another thing I read that was interesting is that ALA has done research too, and they show that the large majority of voters, 71%, oppose efforts to have books removed from their local public libraries. And I know another thing I read was that the Council for Teachers of English Language, I think that's the right group, NCTE, so yeah, that's what it is. They, a lot of, apparently in school libraries, the librarians are having to justify their books, the rationale for having every book that they have.
yes.
So what the NCTE has done is always provided, apparently by individual request, a rationale for keeping a book, but they're making a database now that will be widely available.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Well, and choices, just like, and you'll be talking about this, if we get time, selection, there's always guidelines in the libraries on selecting materials and, accepting materials into your library. I mean, we always look for the highest quality, the things that are vetted by more than one organization as being a good standard of information, or has literary value of some sort, or is entertainment value in the sense of more than one organization has recognized it as a good example of whatever. And we strive to, that's what we strive to include in the libraries. And I know in public schools, that was one of the things we were looking at, the ones get the starred reviews that get high recommendations and things like that. And I know for the community college, it's the same way, is that we look for things that are recommended to be included in a high quality research level library. We look for that stuff. So it's not like we just go to Amazon and dump a bunch of books in the cart and check out and bring them home. There is a process that is done for vetting what comes into the library, just like there's a process of, when things get outdated or they have wrong information in them and stuff, we take them out of the library. So everything is done with the intent of providing the highest quality.
Mhm.
And that's a good segue into, we'll start with you, Terese. How is your library protecting your patrons' freedom to read along with unrestricted access to information and ideas?
Well, this is just coincidental. We started prioritizing buying digital resources during COVID, because people couldn't come into the library. We did some curbside pickup of physical items, but the past couple of years, our focus has been on ebooks, which has the benefit that people can access it from wherever they are, but they also have a great deal of ADA compliant and bonus features, where they contain, most of the databases contain information in a variety of formats, from videos to audios to, articles. It can even read the article to you. It's not pretty, but it does it. They're all screen reader compliant. And they often will have you can switch the language and it'll do, again, it's not pretty, but they do a translation of the article into whatever the person's preferred reading language is. One thing that caught my eye on this question was the idea of filtering the internet. And I know that public libraries and school libraries have to do it because of the Child Internet Protection Act. We don't have to do that. However, we often only have students manning our library. And so we've made the decision, because of repeated problems, I think it's people who've been banned from the public library or from NMSU will just come on over to DACC and start looking at pornography is usually the problem. So right out, where everybody has to see it. So we made the decision, and I think NMSU has this too, that our public access computers are filtered for illegal things and pornography. The students' login computers are not filtered. So they still have free access, and we assume they've got a reason to be looking at whatever they're looking at or they're trying to learn. So it's unfortunate that we have to filter the public computers, but it's out of concern for our student employees who may in fact be underage. So.
Thank you, Terese.
Mhm.
Kevin?
Yeah. Well, like Terese mentioned, we don't filter our student computers, and we are in the process of doing a security review on our public computers because of some issues that have recently come up. And then when I was at UNM, yes, we definitely had a lot of similar issues with folks that would come in and we actually had an adjunct faculty member come in and was looking at pornography, and it was obviously not for research purposes, academic purposes. So, I mean, we did have to sort of navigate policy with issues like that. Definitely. I think how we protect our patrons' freedom to read. Certainly, just by, as we've sort of discussed, we are the place where there's great ideas and there's evil ideas and everything in between is here. We will collect all points of view, and we'll collect encyclopedically, as a function. And I think there's a in terms of an argument against some of the issues that are brought up about censorship in library, censoring libraries, is that, with an academic library cannot function if it's censored, simply because it cannot perform its primary mission. The programs and the academic programs on campus guide us, certainly, but we also have sort of a general education requirement that we need to collect broadly and from multiple viewpoints. I've always found kind of interesting that out of all the lists of books that that circulate, that are the subject of requests for removals, some of the most sinister that we have in our collections, like Mein Kampf, tend not to be, top of those lists. They tend to be other sorts of contemporary issue-oriented kinds of topics. But in fact, we had a faculty member who donated a work that was a World War I memoir just here recently. And she donated it because there were several editions of this memoir. The first edition that came out was extremely sort of brutal in its perspective of the German worldview of World War I, and the subsequent editions mellowed over time. The author sort of altered his point of view to make them less militaristic and so forth. And there is an obvious reasoning for having those different points of view just from one author. So it's definitely, I think our major function is to collect broadly and to ensure that with our collection development activity, that we are supporting the broadest needs of our academic programs. And those can lead to having to collect in areas where there could be, there is potential for some contention.
Thank you very much. And Stephen, we now come to you for the public library viewpoint of the question.
Yeah. So, and we do filter our computers to some degree. And to some degree, some people can find ways around it. So we do need to be a bit attentive. But for the most part, that part is covered. However, we also ensure that the public have access to computers. Throughout most of the pandemic, our library was the only one that had their computer lab open, even when the rest of the library was closed. We were able to maintain that, largely because it's in a separate room, so we were able to secure it off there. As far as ensuring other things, we also have increased our digital collection and are continuing to. We're fortunate at this library that there is a estate, which gives us a comfortable budget for collection development. So we are able to replace things that disappear and, you know, have a much broader selection than we typically would. One of the things, our patrons will recommend books to us. And so we will, as often as possible, pick up what it is that they're looking for. I mean, if they want some $100 folio of some obscure artist, we probably won't pick that one up. But by and large, we will get a copy of whatever their desires are.
Well, and we do interlibrary loans too.
And we do
All of us,
interlibrary
yeah.
loan. That's right.
That provides more access, you know, to the things that we don't have.
That's right. And, you know, we try not to duplicate the college's collection, you know, as,
And we try not to duplicate yours. Unless it's of academic interest, you know.
you mean you aren't collecting all of the James Pattersons in existence?
No, sadly.
And yeah, so, and also making sure that people can find the resources. So that, you know, it's not just having them there hidden on the shelf, but, you know, making sure they're, okay, so my bias is our shelves are too high because we need to, you know, the library needs more work done. But if you're 5 feet and under, you can't reach the top shelf, and that's all there's to it. But I think
Well, and we
can
all
find-
try to have functional catalogs where you can
Yes,
easily search the catalog to see what we have on different topics.
yes, and you know, and we recently got a subscription to Press Reader, which has I always plug that because it's got international newspapers in all their languages. They can be translated, they can be read to you, and it's just a wonderful thing, I think. What other things? Oh, you know, and ensuring patrons' privacies too, because, you know, some patrons are squeamish about checking something, you know, that they maybe think is a little risque with a person. So we have self-checkout stations, and, you know, and we're trained when people ask us a question not to go, what? You know, so really being respectful with people and respecting their privacy and their views, just like we want them to respect the fact that we have whatever, you know, our variety of materials. We want to, I don't know, I guess I believe in treating people the way you want to be treated.
Well, everybody deserves our respect, you know, and consideration.
And quite often explaining and giving examples, you know, you can bring people on board that don't agree with you necessarily when you frame it so that they go, oh yeah, I can see how that would be. And so continuing to speak with the community and keeping this in the forefront of your mind, kind of, not obsessively, but, you know, in front there. And I think I mentioned some of the other stuff already, so that's leaving off getting into the collection anymore. Those are my views and what we can do.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any last comments before we open up the questions from any of the panelists?
I just add, for, well, we're talking a lot about collections and so forth. I think all three of us do have an interest in technology access for our patrons as a way to both protect their freedom to read and their access to information. There's bridging the digital divide goes a long way toward both avoiding and remedying a lot of the
Inequities.
inequities and also the problems that come up with that some of the things that we've discussed. So just definitely have an interest in technology access.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that. Because during the height of the pandemic, we started circulating laptops and hotspots to improve access, which was something we kind of avoided because of the cost and not everything comes back for some reason. But that's been, I think, much appreciated, and we have lost some laptops already. This isn't specifically censorship, but a little off topic. I don't know, maybe libraries can be a point where people learn to live in community.
Be tolerant.
Take care and take care of your stuff, and so other people can use it.
Absolutely.
We're all in this together. But yeah,
that's a good point.
Well, thank you very much, panelists. Again, we have Terese DeSimio, who is representing the Doñana Community College, and Dean Kevin Comerford, who is representing the NMSU libraries, and Stephen Haydu, who is representing Thomas Branigan Memorial Public Library. Thank you very much. And we have about 10 more minutes up to the hour. Do any of the guests that have come to watch the panel discussion have any questions that they would like to? You can type it in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and then unmute yourself. Okay, Mr. Garcia, Juan Garcia, how are you today?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Maybe I misunderstood the article in the bulletin, but I was expecting some really hardcore censorship, if you may. So far, it seems like things are okay. And I will apologize, I have not been in a library in quite some time. I used to live in a library back a few years before the digital era. But as a parent business and a citizen, where I would be concerned for this is K through 12, where people are going to have different views. That's fine, as long as my son is not being forced into an area that he is uncomfortable with, an area that I'm uncomfortable with, and I use the word forced, or being forced in there. I don't see an issue. I mean, whether you have folks on the left, the right, the center, or somewhere in outer space, if you don't want to read them, you don't go look at them. At least that's the way libraries used to be when I used to go there. Nobody forced you to read anything, right?
No.
So I don't know. I've been listening for almost an hour or 50 minutes waiting for the punchline as to, yes, we're having issues in the library with censorship, and I haven't heard it, which is probably a good thing. Thank you.
You're welcome. And yes, and I have to agree that the public school is a different venue from an academic library for sure. Again, a lot of it has to do with age appropriateness. And if it's a well-run public school library or public school district, you know, there are processes in place for parents who may say, no, I do not want my child, my son, my daughter, my children, whatever, to watch this movie or read this book. It goes against my family values, what I'm raising them for. And again, accommodations need to be made, alternatives need to be proposed, that you can still meet the educational objectives, but you don't have to force a child to whose parents disagree with that. And that's, the parent has to be brought into the mix. It's because children are children, you know, everyone's reading Twilight, the big, you know, book, you know, about vampires. Well, if that's not something in the family value system, then you recommend something different. And the librarian's the person in the know about topics, but they're not going to dictate to parents that, oh no, you need to let your child read this and everything. That's a discussion between the parent and the child that the librarian steps away from. So yes, we have academic, which is much older, you know, 18 and above. But Stephen, you know, you're in a public library, but again, rarely do young children come in by themselves. Hopefully they're accompanied by their parents, and then it's the two of them selecting books, or at least reviewing the books before they walk out the door.
Yeah, that's it. It falls squarely on the parents. It's their responsibility. If they're concerned about what their kid might access at the public library, they just need to be there.
Yeah, we do not force feed anybody any particular books. We make things available to the public. That's
so. But thank you, Mr. Garcia. Anyone else?
Well, I think Juan made a good point that we hope that things are, you know, are calmer here in New Mexico than they are some other places. I mean, I definitely I've been keeping tabs on. There's a case in Montana right now where a public librarian is volunteering to leave her position because a group of local parents brought her a list of books that the library actually doesn't have, the public library doesn't have in their collection, but they wanted a commitment from her, like a written commitment to that she would never collect those books, and she refused. And I think those are the cases where, you know, we do need to be aware of and be supportive of our colleagues, certainly. You know, and if we were faced, you know, here at NMSU, as I said earlier, you know, we're fortunate that we typically don't get that kind of social, you know, response. But if we received a request like that, we certainly couldn't accede to it either. And, you know, in the case of a small town public library, you know, she certainly doesn't have the institutional support that we do here for, you know, freedom of expression, freedom of information. So, I mean, there's definitely lots of issues going on right now that are of grave concern.
Mr. Garcia, did you have something else you
Yes.
wanted to say?
Yeah, I have a quick question since I have librarians here. I mean, is this book banning, especially you, Kevin, you're talking about that? I mean, did this come ideology? Is it religious? Do you guys get, ladies, do you get asked to ban the Bible, for instance? I mean, I am having a heck of a time understanding the issue here. Because like I said, libraries, I mean, when I was growing up anyways, libraries had everything, well, everything at the time anyways. So I'm trying to grasp. So do you have this type of requests? Like to ban the Bible, to ban the Quran, to ban?
No, we don't, like here at NMSU, we don't get requests like that. Like Susan mentioned, a lot of the requests are made by parents who are either well-meaning or they do have an agenda, and they tend to happen at public and school libraries. Where the
And I did read that it tends to be a concerted effort of
Yeah.
particular either political agenda or religious. I know that Texas and Florida have done some fairly broad legislative, censorship efforts there, which it makes me think, remember I have a niece who taught history over in Kuwait, and all of their books had to be censored. They would be redacted, people would draw black lines. They were not allowed to learn about the Holocaust. And learning about those things and understanding what other people have gone through is so crucial to a civil society. It concerns me a lot, and the best place we can speak up is at the ballot, I think, with some of the stuff that's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, it's even closer to home. Texas has been world renowned for its tight editorial control over its school textbooks for many years. That they actually have a sort of a core, have had for many years a core group of folks who give their input. And actually, Texas is such a large market for school books, school textbooks, that what is decided in Texas, it affects many other states because the publishers can't afford to customize, for textbooks for every state. So they tend to focus on California and Texas. And and so it's going to be a toss up on which state your local school is supplied from.
I just thought it was interesting that it tended not to be just individual parents. It tended to be an organized effort.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
Dylan, you had raised your hand. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just was going to mention that if you were interested in any of the folks listening in here are interested to see kind of a coordinated effort, what it looks like, I think you could trace back to a state representative in Texas, Matt Krause, who released a list of over 800 titles of books that he asked all school districts in Texas to respond whether or not they held these books. And from that really kicked off a lot of these efforts, including in the Canatee School District, not that far from us, where there was a process to review, which I don't think librarians are opposed to a process to review as long as it follows the process. But a lot of folks were demanding that books immediately be removed and not to follow the process of the selection. And as the panelists have talked about, librarians were trained and have our expertise in this selection process. And so unfortunately, a lot of those books that have been kind of swept up in Texas and other areas are really pointed at a certain point of view. And that's kind of been very detrimental to a lot of folks in our community who often don't see their own perspectives presented in publications, and very few titles in the library. NMSU library has, I'm not sure, maybe close to 2 million titles and folks get, worked up over 1 or 2 titles. I think that's a very, very small percentage, but there's still a process, right? We want to be acknowledge the needs of our patrons and their sensitivities, but there's definitely a process that we go by. I where I personally grew up and some of my family lives are going through this process in their school district libraries. And one of the comments by a person who I know said that, we shouldn't trust librarians with our children. And I just thought that was very, very strange. It just seemed an odd comment. And thankfully, he had to quickly walk that comment back. I think he felt it was misunderstood what he was trying to say. Maybe he was trying to say that it only shouldn't be up to only librarians to.
Well, it isn't. The parents, they
right.
have to be there making the decisions.
Yeah, the parents, the school district, the school board itself, lots of people are involved in these decisions. And sometimes we're not going to get the decision that we like personally, but that's how a democratic society works.
Exactly. And that's why the process is in place, that it's not one individual or a small group of people that are saying yes or no. It is the process is extensive, and it involves a lot of stakeholders, a lot of people in determining the fitness, especially in the public schools, of a resource, a material, and does it support educational efforts and things like that? Is it going to broaden the horizons and open up areas that maybe were not available through other means and things like that? And again, the parent has the option of saying, no, this is not for me and my child, but that's it.
I think Stephen wanted to say something.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes.
I just wanted to point out a couple things. I have a question too, but I don't think we have time for that. So on our request for reconsideration of material, of course, one of the questions is, have you read the book? And not infrequently, they have not, whoever is objecting to it. So I think that kind of speaks to some of that they, the same when a couple weeks into a Pride display, we had patrons coming in all ready to complain about this display that somebody had told them was huge and right there, because it was, summer reading starts about then too. So we're, poisoning the kids. They would come in all afire, and because it was, pretty subtle, and it was in the adult section, it was basically 20 books on a shelf. And then they'd look around and, where is it? They would say really angrily, where is it? And the search staff, well, where's what? The display. And then they'd point over there at that, shelf of a few books and a 8.5 by 11 sign for them to get all huffy about. And,
Well,
and that's how we're damaging our children. But I was also, do we have like a minute? Because my other question was, right now we've been talking about the library collection, and we're focused on libraries, but it also got me thinking about larger censorship issues like speakers coming to universities, and since we have academics here, the extreme one was Salman Rushdie, of course, but then the whole issue of, do we have speakers come that maybe we don't want to agree with, and how that's handled academically here in our neighborhood?
yeah, I know that freedom of speech is a big portion of the academic community, is that expression of ideas, and that has come to NMSU in the past. And it's, if any person would not be allowed on campus, it was because of the reaction to the person being on campus, not necessarily for what they are saying, because the safety of the students is also another thing. So if if a speaker generates enough attention that and attracts people who are there to stir up trouble and possibly cause harm, then that's a different issue than what are they saying? Because, you know, the ability for people to express their opinion is paramount for an academic environment. So the idea, you know, we welcome differing opinions. That's the whole purpose of an academic environment. But you also have to take into consideration what's going to happen. You know, are there going to be protests? Are there going to be people that might come in with an agenda rather than to have civil discourse and be, you know, respectful of each other's opinion? Are they going to start throwing rocks and bottles and you know, beating each other on the head with signs and things like that, or harassing people and making them feel you know, words can make people feel uncomfortable, but when you get someone up in your face who starts yelling and screaming and calling you names, that's a completely different environment. And in an academic community, there is the need to protect, and that can happen in other places, but not on the campus. So we welcome guest speakers with diverse viewpoints, but we do not welcome events that are going to cause harm to the student population or those in attendance. And that's really that was a big issue that had been discussed many times when we talked about bringing in maybe viewpoints that different people didn't agree with and stuff. And it was always a safety, it always came down to a safety issue and things like that. So are there any more questions before we sign off? It's almost 10 after. You had one, Richard?
Yes, I was just going to throw something out. Yes, you may be speaking about, and I appreciate the comments about speaking out on campus speakers. An event at UNM happened a few days ago where I believe UNM failed. So that's a problem. That's censorship. And another thing about censorship in this community, and we focus on K-12, was renaming Oñate High School. 80% of the community was against. You know where was you know, we fought. We had petitions. They renamed Oñate High School. That is censorship. 80% of the students, faculty, and staff were against it. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there, that there's censorship in this community going on that needs to be considered also. But I do appreciate your comments.
Thank you. And again, I think one of our panelists mentioned something about, you know, democracy is diverse voices and consensus and things like that. So when something like what you talked about happens, then there is cause for concern. But there is a process too. And as long as it's civil discourse and respect, then that's, to me, you know, the way things should be handled, as opposed to some of the ways we've seen in other cities and things like that, where people have been expressing their opinions through ways that can harm others. So, well, I want to thank everybody for attending. I appreciate your comments, and thank our panelists specifically. And before we sign off, Dylan, did you want to say just a few words about, we have another event coming up in 2 days on Thursday at the NMSU library.
Right, yeah, we're excited to be bringing in award-winning author Benjamin Allaire Saenz, who grew up here in the Las Cruces area and lives in El Paso now, where he works as a writer and poet, and he'll be coming to speak about specifically his award-winning books on the Aristotle and Dante series, young adult novels. And that conversation will be moderated by Jessica Powers, a local editor and a visiting professor here at NMSU in the English department. So I'd encourage you to come to that. It's free, again, 4 o'clock in person in the Branson Library on Fringer Mall here in the central part of campus. It'll take place from 4 to 5, and afterwards there'll be a book signing if you wish to purchase books by the author, and we look forward to seeing you all there.
Which day is that?
That's on Thursday.
Thursday?
This Thursday.
you.
Yeah. Mhm.
Again, thank you for all coming, and you have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.